me. They can hear you. There, now they can hear me. So now we're streaming. So if Tracy wants to play
Oh,
more audio of kids speaking in
yeah,
unison, she needs to know that the internet is listening.
Hi, Internet.
yeah.
And by the internet, I mean probably just Fred. Oh no, there's a few people there that are not Fred. Hello, few people. Welcome. So we were talking about what to read next. Um,
Yeah.
so I had suggested that we could. I suggested three things. We could go on to the next book in the Magnus Chase series because we just read book one. I know there's a good chance that if we don't move on to that one relatively soon, I might go ahead and read anyway because I listened to it with my youngest son and I'm not going to make him wait for 6 months to a year before we get to the next book like we oftentimes do with series. But that's okay. And then the other options were the Amber Chronicles. Because it's kind of,
Yeah.
as I understand it, classic and been around a long
This,
time, and I've never read it.
yeah.
Yeah,
This
Eric's.
book?
Yeah,
Well,
well,
that's the whole thing.
you're right. That's the whole
So this is going to be
Chronicles.
a portion of that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
actually relatively short. The
Yeah.
first book is only like 5 hours, which is super short for an audiobook. Um, so there we go. Yeah, Dar Jr. is not Fred. He wants us
Yeah.
to know in the chat room.
Yes. Book one.
Yeah, yeah, they looked like they were real
Yeah.
light, easy
It
books
just,
to get through.
yeah.
And then the other one was what was it? Children of Virtue and Vengeance, which is the second book from Tome. The first of which was Children of Blood and Bone, and I know we enjoyed that one a lot. So I wouldn't be opposed to jumping into the second one of that either. I don't know how long that one is. I don't know if Tracy's looked. Tracy, have you looked at that one?
I have not.
It's 13 and a half hours. So it's shorter than Children of Blood and Bone, which was like 18 hours.
How long is the next Magnus
Magnus
Chase
Chase.
book?
I can look that up. Magnus
Well,
Chase.
congrats for having finished the book, Tracy. You
I'm sorry.
sounded. Congrats for having finished the book.
Yeah.
You sounded happy today. Like, I finished the book.
Yes.
Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, The Hammer of Thor, Book 2, is 10 hours and 34 minutes.
Okay.
And then, Eric, you had suggested going back to some other series that we've read before.
I mean, those three options are good, but we also have a series, so I'm flexible.
Okay.
So,
Well, I never read the Russian one. That was an episode I
okay.
wasn't able to make, and I never read the book, so I'd have to listen to both
Okay.
books, which is fine. I can listen to both books.
Yeah. Well, so,
The one thing I have in favor potentially of the Magnus Chase, unless somebody knows that it doesn't go this way, is that it was lighthearted.
It is definitely lighthearted.
yeah.
And that is my expectation from Rick Riordan. I've read his previous series, the 4 previous series he did before this one, and so that is the expectation from him. Now, here's one possible issue. Do we know, is book 3 the final book? Because a lot of his series are like 4 or 5 books long. So I don't know if we want to move through Magnus Chase too quickly because we might run into a wall where we're waiting a year or two in between books.
Well, then we would just flip over to his cousin, right?
Right. Because I think he's been writing the Magnus Chase series at the same time he's been writing this Trials of Apollo series.
Yeah. Well, currently right now
There's 3, at least on Audible.
it's 3, and the third one was published in 2017. So, and since each of them was published one a year, 2015, 2016, 2017, so So it feels like this probably is the last.
So it's probably a trilogy.
Is a trilogy.
Good.
So,
Not to get too far ahead of myself with our discussion, but I tend to like Rick Riordan's books more when he keeps it shorter and tighter. So,
Spoilers.
well, spoilers for my opinion, not spoilers for the book. Like I said, I've read a bunch of Rick Riordan at this point because I read 3 series with my oldest, and now this is the first one that I've read with my youngest. So yeah, there's options. What do you want to do? Eric's easy. I came up with the options, so Tracy has to pick.
Awesome. 5 hours, 10 hours.
5 hours, 10 hours, or what was the other one? 13 hours?
Yeah.
13 hours.
yeah. Or if we're doing Amber, which is 5 hours for the first book, probably the second book's also around 5 hours. Added up, that's about 10 hours. So you can, if
5.5 hours, and the second book is 6.5 hours. So that comes out to a good math. 12 hours.
12 hours, okay.
So two Amber books equals one Tony Adeyemi book.
Yeah.
Alright. Well, if you're gonna make me pick, think I'm gonna pick
Magnus. All right, we will do Magnus Chase book 2,
Yeah.
which is called. What did I say? The Hammer of Thor. So I need to put that in. The Hammer by Rick Riordan. It's interesting. I'm reading Dresden Files books on my own to motivate me to get out and exercise. Did I say is it the Hammer of Thor or just Hammer of Thor? The Hammer of Thor. And there's been elements of that book that I'm reading that also dive into Norse mythology connections. And so I'm getting all kinds so I'm getting different interpretations of Norse mythology as it exists in a real world setting at the same time, and and they both fit well for the style of each author, although it does drive me crazy that in the audiobook for the Dresden Files, Marsders, what's his name?
James Marsters?
The one from Buffy.
Yeah, James Marsters.
Is that James Marsters? I don't know if is that. I always get the one from Buffy and the one who played Cyclops or mixed up.
James Marsden is the one who plays Cyclops.
Okay, so yes, James Marsters. So James Marsters reads all of the Dresden Files books, and I don't know if it's his pronunciation or if this is the guide that he got from Jim Butcher or what, but he reads the giants, the Norse-based giants, as Jotun, and it kind of drives me a little crazy because I've heard enough Norse language pronounced that I'm pretty sure it should be Jotun. Or at least it shouldn't be a hard J, right? So it drives me a little bit crazy.
I've only read it, so to me it was all. So by just reading it, to me in my mind it was always Jotunheim, or it was not the yo. It was that's me reading it.
Yep, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a yo sound. So Fred agrees with me. Fred did make it to the stream, so we can officially start now because Fred's here.
Hi, Fred.
All right, so let me switch over to my script.
Oh,
Shall we get going?
yep.
Fred got me this.
Ooh.
Oh, speaking of journals, have you both gotten yours yet that I shipped
No,
you?
mine's still stating it's still in transit.
Okay.
When I check the codes, it's been the last update was on the 14th of December, and it's still saying it should arrive late, but it's still in transit to its next.
Okay.
And I know you guys having on holidays probably plus stuff I saw in the news about your postal service. So
Right. Have you gotten yours yet, Tracy?
Yeah, I got mine.
Okay. I just want to make sure they get there. I figured we wouldn't start writing in them until after we talked about them once. I figured we'd sort of do 3-episode series on the journals, where we would sort of talk about the journals that we have and what they are and sort of what our first impressions are at the beginning. Then we would start using them and check in like a month or two later, see how it's going, and then we'd check in like 3-4 months later when we finish one of them. And see how it is after we've finished. And doing both of them, and sort of that way we can do a comparison. Sound like a plan?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Alrighty. So, where's my... Okay. Like I said, I have too many windows. I'm ready to record. You guys ready?
ready?
I am recording. Take it away, Trace.
Oh wait, I don't have the.
Oh, you don't have to... So you're not ready.
I thought this was the one where you did the script.
Yeah.
Fitness.
Actually, hold on.
Fitness, I do it all.
We're not ready.
And then Eric left, so clearly nobody who said they were ready was ready. That's okay.
How many days before
I
Christmas?
am back.
It's what, Tracy?
How many days before Christmas?
Oh, I don't know. Not enough, too many. So one of those two. I'm reaching the point where I'm like, I'm a good halfway through my nice long 2-month winter break, and I'm realizing, oh yeah, but like I have work to do. I have writing I've wanted to do. I have syllabi to prepare and courses to get ready for. I should probably get started on that at some point. So, but right now, this week, I'm chilling with the kids.
Sweet.
All right, now we're all ready?
I think so. I just gotta move you so my computer's being really slow. So. Alright. Good now.
All right. Whenever you're ready, you can get us started, and then Sam can just edit all the dead space out.
Sweet. This episode of the Tome Show. Sorry. There's a lot of background noise.
Oh, from who?
I don't. Okay.
Oh.
This episode of the Tome Show is brought to you by AwesomeDice.com, the most awesome place on the internet for dice. Listeners like you, thanks for using the Tome's Amazon and DM's Guild affiliate links, and our wonderful patrons over at patreon.com/the Tome Show. Welcome to the Tome Book Club for December of 2020. The Tome is a D&D news, reviews, and interviews show, and I'm your Tome host, Tracy Hurley.
And I'm Jeff Greiner. In each book club episode, we discuss one D&D related book, spoilers be damned, in full book club style. And our book this time around is The Sword of Summer by Rick Riordan.
And with us, as always, is Eric Paquette.
Hello. How are you guys doing?
Hanging in there. It is days before Christmas hits. And so, we're just enjoying the holidays and hanging in there at the same time, as one does when they celebrate that holiday.
And Eric's been celebrating a lot lately.
Yes, 2 days ago was my birthday, so
Recently turned 27, right?
44 actually. Okay.
I find whenever...
Or level 44. I don't
Right,
know.
there you go. I find that if I just always guess 27, whether somebody is younger than that or older than that, they're usually pretty happy with that guess. So I always just guess 27. Nobody's mad at being 27.
I don't think so.
It's just a number. It's just how many orbits around the sun I have missed.
Right.
And for our next episode, which we'll record towards the end of February, well after my birthday, we'll be reading The Hammer of Thor by Rick Riordan.
So we're continuing the series, and that's an anomaly for us. We often continue series, but we usually don't do them one right after another. But I think my youngest son will be happy with that because I listened to the first book with him, and I don't think he would let me wait the 6 months to a year that we usually wait before reading the next book. So, so there we
It's
go.
always good
Yeah.
to have children continue to read or listen
Right.
to the books.
I think he really enjoyed. He was actually at one point very interested in coming on and being on the podcast with us to talk about the book. I don't think it would go well, but he was interested. So, all right. So before we get started in this discussion of the Sword of Summer, I should mention our sponsor, AwesomeDice.com. They are helping me pay the bills for the few months here. This time around, I want to point out their Sharp Edge dice. These are the sort of precision-made dice that can get really expensive really fast from some places. But Awesome Dice has 4 different sets available that are all fairly affordable. And I'll tell you what, there's a blue set that looks like it's been carved from Arctic ice that's really cool. There's and the other one that I really liked was the Spectre Red that kind of sparkles in the middle and looks like it's made out of magic. So make sure to check them out at awesomedice.com and let them know that you heard about them from the Tome Show. Now, on to the book. So, The Sword of Summer is... So it's a Rick Riordan book, which... Have either of you read any other Rick Riordan books?
I have not.
Okay. I've mentioned before, I've read 3 different Rick Riordan series. There's 2 Percy Jackson series, and I've read them both. And then there's one that's Egyptian-based called The Kane Chronicles, which I've read as well. And then he's got another one out that's Greek. Percy Jackson is Greek mythology based, and I think there's another one that's Greek based as well that I haven't read yet. But anyway, I read a bunch. I read 3 series when my oldest was younger, and we listened to books together more often. And so from those 3 series with Riordan, I had a real strong feeling about how things were going to go in the series. Because Rick Riordan's books are super fun and they're super lighthearted, and they all seem to follow the exact same formula with just sort of different cultural tweaks and some narrative tweaks along the way. And so that experience, I think, flavored a lot of my experience. Like, I've never been disappointed by a Rick Riordan book, but I always kind of know exactly where the story is going to go, at least over the course of the entire story arc. I don't know if that's going to be true here because we've only read book 1, but I suspect I know where it's going. He seems to have figured out a formula that works really well for him, and it makes for a fun story, so I'm good with it. So,
Are all the books set in Boston?
No. Yeah, I don't think. Percy Jackson, so they have their sort of base of operations at like a camp outside of any major town. I want to say New Yorkish. Yeah, Fred is saying Long Island. And the Kane Chronicles, I don't remember. I think they were also in some American city, but I don't remember which one.
Are all the series in the same world, or their own separate world? And there's no interaction, it seems, in this one with any other mythology.
The implication is that all of these stories are taking place in the same world. And so I want to say there was a moment in one of the books, in one of the Percy Jackson books, where they were like, hey, there was some weird stuff that happened over in New York or whatever at this one time, and that's your hint that it was, crossing over with another series or whatever. And Fred is pointing out in the chat that they each sort of take their own little region, and that the Romans were based out of the San Francisco area, although that came out in the Percy Jackson series as well. But of course, that also makes a lot of sense for those to coexist because the Roman pantheon and the Greek pantheon have a lot of overlap. So, was that a spoiler?
Just joking.
Historical spoiler.
Yes, historical spoiler. So anyway, so let's talk about Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard. Book 1, The Sword of Summer. This is a story about a homeless kid named Magnus Chase in Boston, who is sort of has his friends in the homeless community. This guy named Blitz and this other one named Hearth. One of which he normally sees mostly during the day. One of which is usually only around at night. For reasons that become clear as we go on. And as the story progresses, there's some sort of threat that comes out. People are chasing him, and it is determined, or he eventually comes to the realization that he is descended from a Norse god. Oh yeah, you're right. The son of a Norse god.
Son of Frey.
Well, so it took a while before we found out that he was the son of Frey, because I spent several chapters having a discussion with my youngest, trying to figure out what god we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And that was a fun discussion to have with him, because I would say 90+% of what he knows about Norse mythology comes from Marvel movies. Whereas I have watched Marvel movies, Whereas I've watched Marvel movies and read some Marvel comics, and also the Neil Gaiman book on Norse mythology. So, and I kind of, my initial thought was going to be that he was going to be descended from Balder, because Balder is also a god who had. Well, Balder is a god who had died and then come back to life. Yeah. And at that point, our main character, Magnus, had died in, chapter 3, chapter 4, really early on in the series. To draw the comparison, our main character, Magnus, dying early on in the story is this story's version of Percy Jackson going to Camp Half-Blood, where he learns about being a demigod and what have you. Because when Magnus dies, he doesn't die. He fights the gods, or the fire giant king Surt on some bridge in Boston. Who cares? It's just Boston. Get that look from Tracy. He fights Surt, and they both get defeated or whatever, and he's taken off to Valhalla. And Valhalla is sort of this story's version of Camp Half-Blood. Oh, and apparently I'm not crazy, because Fred was also about 90% sure that it was Balder. So that's good. I'm not the only one who's delusional.
No, Balder, what I might thought before you come in, could it be Balder?
Well,
but yeah, because most of my experience with Norse mythology was with a hilarious series called The Almighty Johnsons, where the Norse gods are reincarnated into the folks in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you recommended that once, and I found it. I might have watched 5 or 10 minutes and then got distracted and forgot to get back to it. But yeah. So yeah, I was leaning heavily towards Balder, but I think part of that is because of my lack of deep familiarity with Norse mythology. Um, I don't know that I even knew who Frey was or that Frey existed prior to this book. Like I knew Freya, obviously, but I didn't know about Frey. For you.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found. Oh, go ahead, Tracy.
I was gonna say I had a hard time because it turns out Fred often listens to audiobooks at different points during the day, and I had heard the later chapters of this book without knowing what book it was, and so I can't remember anymore if I heard it, like, for some of these myths, is it from this book, which I totally heard out of context, or was it the other book we listened to from Neil Gaiman or elsewhere? But yeah.
Yeah. I found it interesting. Rick Riordan books are known for being kid friendly. And it's interesting to then read a series based in Norse mythology and based in parentage in Norse mythology in a kid friendly book, because in a way that I don't remember it happening with like Percy Jackson. There's this whole like they dive into like, oh, Freya's got kids with half of Svartalheim or whatever, and he knows from Marvel movies that Freya is married to Odin, and so there's this whole weird thing like, how does she have kids with half of this race of people? But also is married to, like, there's a conversation here that this book sort of implies but never really addresses, that is like, this is a different sort of story to tell with kids, right? Like the Greek gods got into all that kind of stuff a lot too, but I don't remember it being as, I don't remember thinking about it when I was reading the Percy Jackson books. Maybe it was there and I just didn't remember. But
Because there's even in the comment of about Loki with Sleipnir, the horse.
Yeah.
So, which is part of mythology.
Well, it absolutely is. That is definitely a part of. I mean, if it wasn't part of the mythology, then the books would work differently. Although that's not how it worked in the Kane Chronicles. That's the Egyptian-based Rick Riordan story. The Kane Chronicles, the children were not the children of gods, but they were descended from ancient Egyptian powerful wizards or whatever. So they had this bloodline of magical power. So it was a little bit different in that way. So anyway, that was just something that occurred to me as they were going through. So anyway, Magnus dies, goes to Valhalla, and it's a little controversial, right?
Yeah.
He's taken to Valhalla, and there's like, we have to judge whether or not you should actually be here. Or did your Valkyrie screw up by bringing you here? Did you actually die a warrior's death? If you didn't die a warrior's death, you shouldn't be in Valhalla.
And this is the first time ever it's Valkyrie vision, right? So now they have like cameras on the Valkyries, so they can know for sure,
right,
whether or not it was
the
right.
Valkyries.
We did skip something first, though,
Go ahead.
real quick. So we know his mom died. It was like a traumatic event, and I can't remember if it was Harth or Blitz who said, "Hey, somebody's passing out these flyers," and it turns out it's his cousin and uncle, and it looks like his other uncle is the one trying to find him, who collects all these antiques.
Yeah, and there's definitely, and he sneaks into his uncle's house at one point, and all this stuff, and there's a strong implication that there's a larger story there. It doesn't actually play out in this book, right? But it is.
We see the start of it and there's a hint of it at basically the epilogue of the
Yeah.
book that seems to connect it to the story, but
Right.
it does not do an active part of the story.
Yeah. They sort of introduce like these family members as part of the story at the beginning, and
Yeah.
then he dies, and they kind of mostly disappear from the story, except for when he goes to his own funeral, and the cousin pops up, which the cousin who Fred describes as American Hermione, which maybe is fair. Haven't read the other book, so I don't know how she's going to play out. She's still kind of a mystery at this point. But other than that, then they don't show up again in the story until the end in that epilogue, and that was basically because he was told more or less, "Hey, don't forget these people. You should go talk to them. You should confide in them." Right?
Yeah, and it was partially because his mom was worried about the one uncle.
Randolph or
There had been a
Rudolph
huge
or whatever.
Randolph. There had been this huge family fight, and his mom had kind of told him not to trust anyone really
Right.
from the family.
Right. Which is probably, I mean, which is why he has family in town and has been living on the streets, I imagine.
Yeah. But then he ends up, so he gets that sword, and one of the key question marks about whether or not he should have been taken by the Valkyrie is he didn't actually have the sword in hand.
Right.
In the end. And there's like some technicality.
He had sliced Surt's nose off and taken him off the bridge with him, and definitely had died in combat, and died bravely and valiantly. But the sword was not in his hand at the moment of death, and so there was some technicality of he probably shouldn't have gone to Valhalla because of it. And they have you mentioned Valkyrie vision, which feels a lot like Valkyrie body cams, right?
Yes.
But the footage had been edited to make the decision look bad, and they made it very clear like there's no real bad consequences for him if he's there and shouldn't have been. That's not his fault, so he gets to say in Valhalla, other than he might be like stuck on dishwashing duty for 100 years or whatever. But the Valkyrie, Samir, is demoted and kicked out of the Valkyries because of it, and she was already kind of on thin ice, and people didn't trust her. And and it turns out later on we learned that the reason people don't trust her is because she is the daughter of Loki, which is a crazy family. The Loki family is all kinds of diverse.
Yeah.
Anybody who knows about Norse mythology would know how wild and varied that Loki is.
One of the things I wanted to point out is it's kind of funny that on a Frey, he doesn't have his sword at the battle at the end.
Well, and there's it's a weird, like Frey is like a god of summer and peace, right? He's the god of sort of moderation, and which is also a little weird, because summer is not the season of moderation in my mind. But okay, fine. Maybe if you grow up in Norway or Finland, right, then summer feels moderate compared to what you get the rest of the year. But yeah, so Frey is this god of peace and what have you, but yet like the story centers around his sword, the Sword of Summer. And it seems strange for a weapon to be so incredibly important to a peace god. But also the sword is super useful at times, and there's fights where the sword comes into play at times, but it's seldom like the pivotal thing. Right?
Yeah. But the big thing about the sword is that Frey had bartered it away to get something by it, and thus he is fated at Ragnarok to, I think it was, die because he won't have his sword.
Yeah.
So the fact that Magnus died, now the sword in his hand, kind of mimics that prophecy of Frey
Dying without the sword in his hand.
dying down his sword. So,
Yeah, yeah. So he ends up in Valhalla. It ends up that he's not worthy. He still sticks around in Valhalla. He has to fight the people. The people in Valhalla. They live in Hotel Valhalla. It's like a giant luxury resort hotel, and the people on your floor get together once a day or whatever and have battles against people from other floors to the death. But of course it's Valhalla, so you just come back to life.
And time for dinner.
Right. And so he makes friends that way, right? And that's similar. I thought there was going to. In fact, I thought this story was going to involve a lot more time on Valhalla training and whatever to mirror what I saw from Percy Jackson in the time spent in Camp Half-Blood training and preparing, and there was a lot more of sort of the Harry Potter boarding school sort of storyline for a little while, as I recall. It's been a minute since I've read Percy Jackson, but anyway, yeah. So I thought it was going to do more of that, but they didn't actually stick. Like he stuck around long enough to get in one fight in Valhalla, and then he was gone the next day. So, and part of him getting away, part of him leaving was because there's a tree in all of the hotel rooms. And it is branches from the world tree, Yggdrasil. And so his old homeless friends, Hearth and Blitz, show up, and it turns out that they are actually the elf Hearthstone and the dwarf Blitzen. And then they sort of get away from there because it's very important. Sam even told him when she was being kicked out that it was very important that he recover the sword, that you find the sword. And so from there is it from there did they go straight back to Boston from there?
I believe so, because they had to go to see if he had the sword
On his body.
Which is when he sees his cousin.
Yes. They see the cousin. There was an attack. I forget who attacked him. Because the Valkyrie the Valkyries aren't chasing him yet.
mm.
But there was an attack because Hearth definitely was injured.
Right. So, because
It's not Surt. Surt, that was the first thing that killed him.
Mm-hmm. And Surt's still recovering back in Muspelheim. I don't remember. There was some sort of an attack. Was it Sam?
well, wasn't it that his cousin was coming? But I know what you're saying about Hearth getting hurt. But I thought it was just the cousin coming in, but I'm not sure.
The cousin came in, but I think there was also there was a chase right afterwards.
Right.
And it turned out that what person they were chasing was Samir, who's oftentimes referred to as Sam.
Yeah. And then they see Blitz coming up from the subway.
Right, and it turns out Blitz, being a dwarf, is always has to cover all of his body head to toe and whatever, because if he spends time in the sun, he slowly petrifies and turns to stone. Which is why when they were posing as homeless people watching over him, that he only came out at night.
Right.
And Hearth is interesting because Hearth is the only elf left in the world or in the worlds that is reviving the art of rune magic. Magic has sort of faded from memory in all of these different places in the 9 worlds, but Hearth is relearning rune magic. And was it shortly after that we find out who Hearth and Blitz are working for?
Yeah, because Blitz is coming up with a bag that has capo in it.
Yeah. Yeah, so then we find out that they are working for, is it Mimir?
Mimir.
Which is another Norse god I had never heard of before.
isn't also there that we learned that Sam had been visited by Odin? That's why she was asked by Odin to go get Magnus, or is that a bit later?
Well, we find out she was asked by someone, but she won't say who.
Right.
I think until much later.
Yeah,
That's right.
the Odin reveal I think is right at the end because everybody else is like, well, Odin's been kind of quiet for a long time now. Nobody's
Yeah,
really
but
nobody's really heard from Odin in a minute.
yeah, yeah, no, but she does mention beforehand that she got before that Odin was the one who told her before we had the Odin reveal at the end.
Okay.
So I do remember that.
So yeah, so there's Mimir who is looking out for him for reasons.
Yeah. All have their reasons.
They're all Mimir is looking out for him for reasons, and so Mimir sent Hearth and Blitz after him. Do you notice the propensity for dwarves to be named after reindeer?
Yes.
Okay.
There's Thunder, I think, or something like that.
Donner.
Donner.
Yeah. He's blitzing. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself because we're not there yet, but yeah. And so what is it from there? They were trying to get somewhere in the Nine Worlds. Was it they were trying to get to Svartalheim to the dwarves? Okay, because that's when they learned about the Fenris wolf. Was from Mimir, I think. Is that right? This is the episode of all of us just sort of trying to remember what the book was.
Yeah, I know.
I guess we should take a quick moment and just say a lot happened in small areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were so many different demigods and gods and everything else. So I know, like, for instance, we still haven't talked about falafel yet.
No. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot that goes on, and maybe going play by play isn't really the point, because
Because they move about
yeah.
a lot through. I don't think they visit all the Nine Worlds, but they visit
Well, yeah,
a lot
they
of
end up
worlds.
traveling up the world tree. They meet or are attacked by Ratatosk, the squirrel of the world tree, and you get some of that Norse mythology story of how Ratatosk runs from the top of the tree to the roots over and over again, sort of churning up the rivalry between the dragon? Yeah.
And the
that's
eagle.
Right. The dragon at the roots and the eagle at the top. And they end up in the other afterlife where Freya's in charge, and it turns out Blitzen is a son of Freya. And so we meet Freya, and that's sort of like it's sort of like Valhalla, but for hippies, is the way I read Freya's afterlife. Does that sound right? Because they would like randomly just attack each other between like laying on a hillside looking at the flowers.
Yeah.
And so that was a whole thing. There was the story where they went to and got falafel, and it turned out the guy running the falafel stand is Samir's betrothed. Although that exact relationship doesn't come out until later, and then they meet a random frost giant who was shape changed into, was it a pigeon?
Yeah.
A pigeon, then I believe was an eagle afterwards.
Yeah, and convinced Magnus to go off on a quest to get an apple of immortality for him. I kind of hope that plays out more in later books, because otherwise it's just a weird side quest to go get an apple for. They also learn some information about.
Yeah, it wasn't just while you're there, could you give me this apple?
Right.
Yeah. And then it was a river spirit or river goddess.
Randia. I I couldn't remember if she was river or
I
not, but
think
definitely is some
I
sort
thought
of
she was
water
out in
god.
the ocean, but I could be remembering wrong. But
Yeah, she was definitely out in the ocean. The hard part is, I believe he dropped the sword in the Charles, which could have traveled out to the harbor ocean area. Um, I think she went in.
sure.
No,
But and
like I said, I'm
so
not too sure.
yeah, and she's sort of the ocean goddess of collecting junk that's fallen into the water, right? And so
Yeah.
Flag lady
yes,
is how Magnus puts her.
yes. Well, which matches his frame of reference as having been homeless for several years.
Yeah.
And so they manage to get that figured out. They figure out that all of this is happening because Surt wants to see the world burn and start Ragnarok, and so Surt wanted the Sword of Summer to free Fenris Wolf. And Fenris Wolf is going to be, the island that holds Fenris Wolf is going to be available again, in a couple of days or whatever. And so it's a race to get a new rope to tie up Fenris Wolf because they believe the rope is going to fail soon enough anyway. And make sure that Surt is not able to free Fenris Wolf and start Ragnarok at the same time. This is where I was fairly certain that they were going to fail and that Fenris Wolf was going to be freed, because that fits the Rick Riordan formula. That they struggle in the first act, they struggle really hard to stop the end of the world, and then at the end of the first act they fail. In the second act they struggle with that, and in the third act they find a way to make everything okay even though they failed to stop the end of the world. That's sort of the formula as I remember other Rick Riordan books. And it turns out they don't fail. They do manage to retie up Fenris Wolf. They do manage to defeat Surt and not have Ragnarok start. But I'm still not convinced that that's not the formula that's going to play out in later books. It's just not going to be dealing with Surt using the Sword of Summer to free Fenris Wolf. It might play out differently. We've also added, once he gets the sword back, or after he gets the sword back after a little while, we add a new member to the party, that being the sword itself. The sword flies around and talks and is its own character and wants to be called Jack because its name is too long.
Yeah.
As one does.
Right. So they end up going to Svartalheim to get a new rope. They think there's a master dwarven smith that would be capable of crafting a new rope. I like the idea that the most powerful magical enchantments in dwarven crafting is formed by combining, was it like two impossible things?
Paradoxes.
Yeah, a paradox. So that was fun. And then there's a craft off between this dwarf, which I think that's Donner, against Blitzen, right?
Not just any craft off, though. This one is now with fashion.
Well, it wasn't originally, right? It was just a craft off, but then Blitzen turns out Blitzen is a fine enough crafter, but he's really only good at fashion. He's not a traditional dwarven crafter.
And ducks.
Well, right, and that's not going to serve him well in this. And so they have 3 rounds, and round 1, he crafts a duck. What is it? A duck that turns into a bigger duck? Is that right?
Yes.
And he only wins that round because a horsefly shows up and messes up Donner, and he screws up his whatever he's crafting. And then he starts to turn his skills to something else because otherwise the only thing he ever crafts is ducks. So he's inspired to embrace this idea of fashion, and so he makes He makes a bulletproof vest to go with a 3-piece suit. And then he also makes is that a tie?
It's like a necktie that protects you, I think, from things.
Yeah. So he makes armor that's fashionable. And again, probably would have lost all 3 rounds, but then the horsefly shows up and bothers Donner every single round, and that felt very much like the kind of stories I'd read in Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology. Right? There's stories there of like dwarven craft competitions or whatever, and stuff like that happens. Right? That felt like something that was very reminiscent of the mythology that is told in of that culture.
Right.
But anyway, so that was fun. I also really enjoyed that in Svartalheim, in the dwarves, like everything is crafted and everything has a name. Like they go to the tavern and it's like, welcome, have a seat in I don't know, butt holder, or whatever they're, and everything has a name, right? And everything has properties and everything has a history. And that sounded like a lot of fun to me. I don't know that I would want to bring that into like my D&D game, because I would run out of good ideas real fast and it would turn ridiculous, which is kind of like going ridiculous makes sense in the context of this kind of a story. So it worked. But I don't know that I would want it to be that way in my D&D games all the time.
Is it a good time to bring up that the author is a D&D player, like has played D&D for a long time?
I actually did not know that about him.
Yeah, I looked it up. So unless I somehow got it wrong, I believe he's a D&D player. So, which made total sense to me as I was reading it.
There you go.
You do see the hints of D&D player while reading the book, and honestly, have a bunch of stuff, everything named, fits my style of gaming, because my style towards the silly and wild.
But it wasn't just like magic items. All magic items are named. It was like the cup that you're going to drink your mead out of has a name and a history, and somebody made it.
And somebody made at least one of them so that if it goes empty...
Yeah, one of them explodes if it's ever empty. So that was fun. What other scenes were there?
Well, so the other thing about that visit to the dwarves is that they had to get earrings.
Because Mom wanted it. Mom being Freya, Blitzen's mom. She wanted new earrings because she's apparent, and she had like a pile of earrings there in her throne room or whatever. So the implication being that whenever somebody needs something, she sends them on a quest for earrings. So.
I know you have to go get like this new rope thing, but while you're there,
to save us all, or at least delay it. And actually,
don't be a deer.
Well, and actually, I found that to be interesting. I liked that about like nobody is trying to stop Ragnarok. We run into multiple gods or entities or whatever. Nobody's trying to stop the apocalypse in Norse mythology. Ragnarok is going to happen. It's not debatable. It's not questionable. It's just an issue of when. So they're just trying to buy some extra time. And that's all anybody's ever doing in Norse stories, right? Is they're just trying to get more time.
I forget, do we get a hint of who sent that horsefly that was bothering Donner?
Well, afterwards, we definitely find out that the horsefly bothering Donner was Samir, shape-changed into a fly.
Yeah.
And that's when we start to get some of the, like, she's real sensitive about, like, yes, I can shape change, I don't like to do it. Right? Yeah. And we start to find out that there's a history, there's a shameful heritage there that she doesn't like to talk about, that eventually we learn is because she is the daughter of Loki. And so she has the ability to shape change, but because she's a Valkyrie, and the Valkyries don't trust Loki, because he's, burned them one too many times, they, as a result, sort of extend that we don't trust you because you're the daughter of Loki, and so she doesn't like to use her shape-changing powers because it reminds people that she's the daughter of Loki.
Yeah. But
Loki
Loki,
would never do that.
Right.
yeah. I mean, and Loki does show up early on in the book, and gets mentioned. You know, he is trapped and being poisoned and all that,
Yeah.
but he can still project himself.
Yeah. No.
Uh,
In fact, we meet Loki early on, and I think we meet all of Loki's most famous children.
yeah,
Because we meet the World Serpent, we meet Hel,
mm,
or Hela, and then we meet Fenris Wolf, which are
and
all children of Loki.
also Sleipnir, the horse.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a child of Loki?
I thought Sleipnir was a child.
I don't remember if Sleipnir was a child of Loki or if Sleipnir was like the father of one of the children. I don't remember now though. It's not that crucial, but we meet a lot of iconic sort of classic things. Although it turns out, we go through all of this. They get the rope. They go through the process of hiring the dwarves to take them out to the island that can only go out every so many years. And it's all classic Rick Riordan ridiculousness, right? Because one of the dwarves is dressed up in a lobster costume or whatever, and all of that, and they're all very corny, and they go out knowing full well. And I enjoy this as well because it's sort of like Ragnarok. There's a lot of in Norse mythology, from what little I've experienced it. There's a lot of there is there is an inevitability, like things are gonna go pear shaped, and it's gonna go bad, and there's nothing you can do about it. But you can at least be aware that it's going to go bad, and that's what it was with the dwarves. Like, well, these dwarves are gonna screw you over. They're gonna try to rob you, or they're gonna try to kill you, or maybe both, or whatever. Right? It's inevitable, but they're also the only ones who can get you to the island with Fenris Wolf. And so they go anyway, and then and the dwarves, their scheme was, oh yeah, it's real cheap. We'll take you out. You'll take the tour. Oh no, we're not getting off the island. And then they go out to off the shore a little bit. Says, oh, by the way, the return trip's a lot more expensive. You're gonna have to give us all your stuff, right? And they're like, nope, we'll find our own way. Bye. So yeah, and then they get to the island. They find Fenris Wolf. There's this interest. I enjoy the sort of, what is it, the heather that ends up actually being the binding, because the rope is more symbolically binding him at this point. It's mostly fallen off. But the heather that grows around the circle, the pit where Fenris Wolf is captured, keeps him in. And this is when Hearth is starting to come into his own as a spellcaster, right? He's got his wizard staff now and all that kind of stuff. And we're starting to see some more of that. And I enjoyed the exchange with Fenris Wolf, but in the end, they managed to get the rope tied up around Fenris Wolf, which is where the sword comes in, right? They tie the rope around the sword and have it like fly around him and tie him up.
Yeah, use Jack as a needle.
Right, which I think was part of the point. Like the power, the reason that the Sword of Summer was necessary to tie up Fenris Wolf was not to battle Fenris Wolf. It was to do this non-combat thing to tie him back up. And then Surt shows up, and fighting happens. The roommates from Valhalla show up, and turns out they've been pretending to be hunting him, but they're really still on his side, and they help fight Surt and the giants, and the Valkyries are there, and a big battle breaks out, and then ultimately he wins by what does he get rid of the sword? He ends up doing something that pulls all the giants sort of back into their portal.
Yeah, he lets go of the sword, and the sword rips a hole in space and time and pulls them through.
Right. And so ultimately, it is by not fighting with the sword as a child of Frey that he defeats the giants. And then, oh yeah.
And we had completely skipped, by the way, before this, the whole getting Thor's hammer.
Oh, we skipped the Thor thing completely. which turns out,
I was going to go back to it because
yeah, which might be important since the next book is called The Hammer of Thor.
Yes, because we learned that yes, Thor has lost his hammer.
No, he didn't. He really didn't.
No,
Though.
no, yeah.
We're not allowed to tell
That's
anybody.
true. No,
He
not funny,
definitely
but
hasn't
yes.
lost his hammer. Yeah, there's this whole like they run into Thor thing,
And Jack and the Golden Goose type, almost Jack and the Beanstalk type
yeah,
setup.
yeah, they
Set
have
up.
Thor tasked them to go up and deal with these giants, um, and recover his missing weapon that's totally not missing. Thor makes it very clear, like he doesn't have his hammer, but nobody can know that he doesn't have his hammer because then the giants would like run amok because it's fear of Thor and his hammer that holds the giants at bay.
Yeah. And there's the whole rules of hospitality,
Right.
permission, and all that. All the direct stuff, and you see a
Yeah.
few times the giants try to kill off
Yeah.
just by respecting the rules.
Well, these rules of hospitality thing that was interesting because it's definitely the kind of thing I kind of remember hearing in the Norse mythology book that I read. That kind of stuff existed, but I'm much more used to those kind of rules when we're talking about like fae stories. Of course, it would make sense that there could be some cultural overlap in Northern Europe and the UK at that. Well, England, Scotland, what have you at that time. But yeah, no, that was the moment when it occurred to me like these kinds of rules exist in both of those mythologies in a way that is probably traceable, that it hadn't occurred to me before. Yeah. And then so anyway, and then we sort of get the falling action, right? We get turns out that Odin was the one who set them all on this path all along, and Odin was actually. Was it Odin that was actually in disguise as one of the floor mates that was on the team?
Yeah, he was the half troll.
The half troll, yeah. So Odin was there with them the whole time, fighting in Valhalla, and while everybody in Valhalla went to dinner and looked up at Odin's empty throne, waiting to see if he had anything to say or whatever, he was actually sitting there eating biscuits with them the whole time. And so Odin is revealed as sort of being the one who sort of set all of this into motion. But also then it is also revealed that the real villain this whole time that set things in motion on the other side to get Ragnarok kickstarted turned out was Loki all along. And Loki had shown up to Magnus early in the story, and I think a couple times in the story shows up with sort of like, hey, I'm a nice guy, I'm just trying to help you out, and you kind of sort of believe him. Like and you wonder, like, how much do I sort of maybe think that Loki isn't a horrible person because I don't know enough about this version of Loki to know whether or not he's massively untrustworthy. And how much is it, just cleverly hidden or whatever. But because from other stories and other versions of Loki, like Loki's never trustworthy, period, ever.
No, he's the god of lies and all that, and the fact that he's the god of lies, or you're not trustworthy, you can't trust what he said, doesn't mean that he's necessarily a bad guy. I mean, he has his own agenda, he has his own layers and own plans and what to do. I mean, carefully trapped. All of a sudden, we find out he seems to have several layers.
Well, right. And that's sort of the implication at the end is like, well, so Loki, your plan failed. I guess Ragnarok has put off for a while, and he was, well, let's not be too hasty. Like the plan hasn't failed yet. Just this plan has failed, but I have plans within plans within plans because I'm Loki. Of course I do. And that's where I say, like, I expected by the end of this that Ragnarok would have been started because that fits my conception of Rick Riordan's storytelling, and I'm still not convinced that they're going to stop Ragnarok. Ragnarok, in my mind, is probably still going to happen, maybe at some point in the second book, And then the third book is all about making that okay. Because ultimately, one of the things about that I understand about Norse mythology is that Ragnarok is inevitable and it will definitely happen. But it's not an apocalypse like other mythologies have an apocalypse. Like now the world is over, right? It is sort of the end of one age and the beginning of a new age. And that's sort of what Ragnarok is about. And so it's like it's almost, it's almost okay. Like Ragnarok is fine because one thing ends but another thing begins, and the world doesn't end. Humanity's not over. It's just we're moving on to something else.
Which, if you read most apocalyptic prophecies and all that, that's usually what it is. It's usually the end of an era
Right.
and then end of age. The world as we know it is completely changing.
Right. So that was a really long discussion of what this book is about. And we talked about sort of what we liked and what we didn't like along the way. It definitely has these this D&D-ish feel to it sometimes. Like Rick Riordan books move quickly. There's always a party. They move from quest to quest to quest, and they all kind of tie together, but they're, it's almost tangential, but then it all kind of comes together at the end. Like going off to recover the sword was absolutely necessary, but it was also definitely a side quest, right? And so there's a lot of things like that feel very D&D-ish in its story structure, in its party structure.
Yeah. And for D&D, they can easily probably bring the world of Magnus and use like Planescape to do the various worlds and all that. For even the concept of some of the characters,
I mean,
would totally play this game.
Here's like, I don't know if either of you have ever watched any Dimension 20. It's an actual play series on YouTube by Brennan Lee Mulligan that started on College Humor, and it's still part of College Humor, but it's got its own separate channel and everything now or whatever. But one of the things that has shown me is how well D&D can be adapted to different weird and creative settings. So there's a part of me that says you could definitely just be in this world. You could definitely tell a story in the world of Percy Jackson and Magnus Chase and all the others, and just play D&D, right? You could like Hearth is clearly a low-level wizard who levels up as we go along, right? Magnus is, what would you say Magnus is? Probably a fighter?
Yeah, because Jack is the fighter.
I suppose Jack is the fighter, right?
Jack is the fighter. I don't think Magnus is quite the fighter. He's more of a thinker.
But he's kind of he gets into a fight at the beginning with Cert, and he fights in these battles on for a son of the god of peace. He does a lot of like killing in this book. Like it occurred to me like he is a teenage kid or whatever, who grew up on the streets or whatever and what have you. But like the first time he gets into a fight and gets his hand on a sword, like he's killing folks, and it doesn't really bother him. It never at any point in time in the story does it bother him. Like, no, I sent this sword into the brain of a giant and slaughtered this person, right? And it just sort of happens, and they move along. So,
Sam, would she be a paladin?
maybe. Although Fred was suggesting maybe druid for Magnus. I don't know, because Sam's shape changing could be wild shape, and she could be the druid, or be a druid.
Yeah, Magnus does have the healing abilities.
Oh, he's the cleric.
Yeah,
Maybe that's it.
cleric makes sense for Magnus. So
Or paladin, because it's more of like lay on hands. He doesn't do it very often.
true. Yeah, so he could be the paladin for part of healing
I don't know.
type thing. So yeah, there some of them are easy to
Right.
really put in, but some are
Any case, the
some
point,
of them can be
I
multi-class.
think the point being that you could totally have,
Oh yeah,
you could totally make a campaign
yeah,
of this book,
yeah,
and play it just straight up D&D rules. Just living in a world where you could still be on Earth and you could still be whatever class you are and you could still have magic and what have you, and just kind of be okay with the fact that most of the rest of the world has no idea that the world is like that. And there has
yeah,
to be sort of this social contract at the table that, like, okay, but like we're playing a game where the rest of the world doesn't know this, and you kind of have to maintain that illusion. Like, you can't just blow all that up on the first encounter and just like tell the world that there's gods and stuff running around, because that would sort of break the game a little bit, right? That would
yeah,
sort of break the aesthetic of the setting. So
yeah. And outside of D&D, there's also other games that exist out there that go specific for that one.
yeah.
Like there's part-time gods where you balance between being the child of a god and so your godly powers and just maintaining a normal life,
Mm-hmm.
uh, normal mortal life. So you balance it out. There's Scion also from White Wolf. That also, again, the concept that you are the son of deities. Nobilis, another game that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so there's other games too that deal with
Yes.
being part of divinity.
Absolutely. All and as you say that, it occurs to me, even again within D&D, you could very easily, I think, reskin the Mythic Odyssey of Theros, which is
Yeah,
very much Greek god inspired, right? And just sort of reskin it to make it work, and use that,
yeah.
to be champions of various gods and tell these stories. So
Um, and then one thing that I did find interesting that you could also bring into D&D from the book is the magic of place. So it is the most coherent expert of Boston that I've ever
uh,
come
well,
across.
yeah, I wondered if that wasn't part of. Fred had suggested this book to us last time we chatted, and I wondered, as I was going through it, and you were reading it, and I'm reading it myself, and I'm catching all the Boston, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's why he suggested this one as opposed to all of the other Rick Riordan books, because it's got that Boston connection, and I wondered how well that felt to you.
Yeah, and because trying to explain Boston is interesting to me, and I'm a city I've ever lived in. So I mean, I've lived in other places, but not a city. But the differences just in the neighborhoods, like how the North End feels different than Southie and stuff like
Mm.
that, and the fact that the North End isn't really north anymore because of how the topology of Boston has changed over time. They filled in Back Bay to make more land. That's the place where they're talking about all those mansions.
Oh.
The brownstones, they have to keep putting the pilings down, and that's because they filled in a water body to create more land.
Nice.
And so things that used to make sense in the same way anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it just and it has that old world feel in some areas, and like the whole fact you have public alleyway number XYZ, sort of thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting and cool with it.
And I like the ducks being access to the world tree.
Yeah, well, and so it's like made all these things make sense. So I'm like, was there actually a group of people once upon a time that thought Boston was first found in terms of Europeans by the Norse?
By the Norse, yeah.
And the hub of the universe was a real thing even before the book.
Oh yeah. Nice. So yeah, no, I thought it was a fun book. Obviously, we all must have thought it was a fun thing, because this is the first time I think we've ever done a book that was part of a series and then immediately gone on to the next book of the series. So there we are. Any other last thoughts or things to say? Because we are at a little more than an hour now. The chat room, by the way, is all Fred.
Yeah.
We've got a bunch of people in the chat, but Fred's the only one that wants to talk to us. Thank you, Fred. No, don't be sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, no, me when I started the book, I wasn't too sure about Magnus as a character. I had some issues, but as you go along, he grows up, and because at the start of the book, I wanted like felt he was a pesky teenager, and then I just wanted like, okay, I just wanted to slap you in the back of the head, and
Yeah.
but as he goes along, he grows up and he learns, and
Yeah, and there's definitely there's differences. As much as I talk about how Rick Riordan has a formula and he follows it, and that's still feels absolutely true. And there's definitely differences between Magnus Chase and Percy Jackson. I don't know that it would be inaccurate to describe it as Magnus Chase still to me feels like just a Norse version of Percy Jackson, like as a character. Rick Riordan does not have a wide breadth of storytelling tropes that he falls back on, right? But he does this type of storytelling in a way that I find entertaining, and I guess other people do too, because he keeps doing it and he keeps working. He keeps selling books. So there we are. Any other last thoughts? All right, then we're going to go ahead and call that the end of the episode. It's time to say goodbye. I want to say thank you to awesomedice.com, as well as all of our patrons at patreon.com/thetomeshow. And those of you who shop at Amazon and DM's Guild using the affiliate links that are available at thetomeshow.com.
And if you'd like to contact us, you can send us an email, thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can call our biz line. It's 919-BIZTOME, 919-BIZTOME. You can find me on Twitter at SarahDarkMagic. That's Sarah with an H, and SarahDarkMagic.com. You can find Jeff at Squatch, SQUACH, and at The Tome Show. And you can find Eric at Eric M. Pack.
Eric with a C, Pack with a Q.
And watch our stream of episode recordings on twitch.tv/Tome Show, or watch the video after the fact on the Tome Show's YouTube channel. And other great shows at TomeShow.com.
And that's our thoughts on The Sword of Summer by Rick Riordan. So next up in February, around the end of February, we will be reading The Hammer of Thor by Rick Riordan. So if you want to read the book and join us in the stream and tell us about what you read, be our silent guest who's still talking to us that way, that would be awesome. I'm sure Fred would love to have the company. So until then, keep turning the page, Tomites. The end. All done. Thanks everybody who joined us in the stream, and thank you, Fred. Seriously. Oh, and what do we draw? Nice.
Watercolor doodles.
Nice.
Cool.
So yeah, the users in chat always it's showed me a good number of people the whole time, but I don't know what to believe ever, because the viewer count number says 4.
Yeah.
And one of the users listed in the users in chat is not Fred, but Fred or Dar Jr. But those are the only people that talked in the chat besides Eric. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I never trust the Twitch, the numbers or what have you. It's always weird. So thank you all for joining us, though, whoever's there. This was a lot of fun. Fred, make sure you read the next book so you can come and chat with us as well. That was fun.
Yeah.
So, all right. In that case, it is almost 9:30, and I'm tired. So I'm going to go ahead and end the stream, if that's cool.
Yeah.
Goodbye, stream.
Bye. Happy Merry Christmas for all of you. Happy holidays and good Happy New Year.
And wear a mask.
Wear a mask.